والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد، قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والفجر وليال عشر صدق الله العلي العظيم. Our series of lectures have gone into its final session. It's almost like yesterday that the first of Muharram came, and within a couple of hours we will be on the day of Ashura. That day the trial and tribulation befell the Ahlul Bayt. The prediction of the coming of Ashura is not something which starts with the Prophet. It's something that Adam alayhi salam was told about. And from then onwards every prophet got bashar of this day. Until that final day came where a night like today, Sayyid al-Shuhada was standing there with his companions. Today each one of us are here, each one of us are mourning, each one of us are commemorating the Shahada of Sayyid al-Shuhada. You see, tonight is nothing less than Laylatul Qadr now. Know that when it comes to dua, dua is accepted when the wasila of Sayyid al-Shuhada is taken. For all of those people who have been asking for the last 364 days, know that tonight is that night when your dua will come true. The belief is that it's Sayyid al-Shuhada that takes our duas towards Allah. Allah is waiting for an excuse from us. You see, Allah can grant all of your prayers if He wanted to, but Allah tonight wants to show the status of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And tonight is that night then, that when tears come into your eyes, we do many sins in our life. Many sins that we make hell for ourselves. But know that tonight, if one drop of tear comes into your eye, this tear will alleviate you from the fire of hell. The power of one tear tonight, which is shed for the sake of the son of Zahra, will alleviate all of your sins tonight, will take you out of hell and will take you towards heaven. Tonight is that night where you give condolences to Fatima Zahra. Join her tonight as she moves from Medina tonight and she's heading towards Karbala, a broken woman with a heavy heart. As she goes towards Karbala, she is saying, is there anyone to cry over my son? Who will say labbaik to her tonight? As she's moving, she's going and she's saying, is there anyone to cry over my son? Tonight she will get to Karbala. Which night is tonight? That night when Sayyid al-Shuhada is walking with Sayyidah Zainab on the Maqtal, and he says, and he points towards her and he says, this will be the place where our brother Abbas's arm will be chopped off. And again he moves to the next location. He says, this is the place where the other arm will be chopped off. And as he moves, he stops. He says that this will be the place where our brother Hassan's young son's body will be shattered. And as he begins to walk, he says, this will be that place where your son Aun will be killed. This is be the place where Muhammad will be killed. One by one, he goes from one location to the other location to the other location, until he gets to a point where he sees a woman dressed in black sitting there, taking the rocks with her own hand and cleaning the ground. And as she cleans the ground, she cries. And as she begins to cry, she says, Wa Hussein, my son Hussein. She begins to call her son. So Sayyidah Zainab, she says, who is that woman sitting there cleaning those rocks, calling her son Hussein, calling for you? You know what? Sayyid al-Shuhada looks to Sayyidah Zainab, says, recognize her, she's our mother Zahra. Tonight is a night where we could go for 40 minutes looking at the musibah of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Had it not been for the fact that we have to finish that series which we started 9 days ago, I would have spent the whole hour looking at the masayib of Sayyid al-Shuhada, and still it wouldn't have been enough. Tonight you're here to cry, but that journey that we started from Sayyid al-Shuhada to Imam Mahdi has to complete today. There were many topics that we raised. There were many topics that I wanted to discuss. There are many topics that we weren't able to discuss. But nevertheless, inshallah, if Allah gives us life, maybe some other time. Each one of us now needs to call Sayyid al-Shuhada to say that we're here for him. So the brother said it very nicely. When Imam Hussein was alone, go and look at the words of the Maqtal. He was alone. Everyone is gone. Looks right, no one's there. left, no one's there. An old man, heavy-hearted, alone standing there. All of the bodies lying there. He raises a call. He says, Hal min nasiri yansurana. Is there anyone to help us? Is there anyone to help the haram of Rasulullah? Alone now. He wasn't saying it for just them. He was saying for each one of us sitting here in Bathurst and across the world, are you willing to accept my message? Are you willing to answer my message? That message of Sayyid al-Shuhada still rings today. You know why? Because Sayyid al-Shuhada remembered you, the Shia of Sayyid al-Shuhada, on 2 maqamat. Inshallah, we'll look at that in 40 minutes or so. He remembered you and he called you on 2 places. When his heart was broken and when there was no one there, he remembered all of you. And he addresses you by saying, my Shia. So therefore he is remembering all of you until the Day of Judgment. Each one of you he remembers. Today, the 12th Imam as well, the Warith of Sayyid al-Shuhada, is standing today and he's calling for you. He's saying, is there anyone to help me? Is there anyone to help this message of Sayyid al-Shuhada? Your Imam is heartbroken today. Your Imam is that Imam who every morning sees the tragedy that took place in Karbala, and every morning he cries tears of blood. So therefore, we have a responsibility. In this session, let's make a pledge to ourselves that we will fulfill that responsibility which has been made incumbent upon us. What is that responsibility? We looked yesterday when the Imam comes, right? According to the tradition it says the final year before the heralding of the Imam alayhi salam, before the coming of the Imam will be a strange year. In that year you'll see droughts, in that year you'll see deaths, in that year you'll see tragedy upon tragedy take place. According to the traditions, it says 1/3 of the world will be wiped out because of wars. All over the world there will be wars, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in the Middle East. You'll see war upon war, and 1/3 of the world will be wiped out because of illnesses. The spread of various illnesses. In a tradition it says, as sin increases, Allah introduces new diseases into society. As new diseases come, as these diseases spread, you find as sin spreads, these diseases spread as well. Look at those diseases which were before and look at the diseases which are now. You find much more people are suffering from many more diseases. It says in the tradition, as sins increase, the velocity of diseases increase, the velocity of death increase. This is why it says in the tradition, sudden death will become common. A person will be walking, they'll collapse and they'll die. Before the coming of the Imam, you'll see the list of sudden death. You see, we can change that destiny because as I said and as I've been saying, Dua changes everything. We're not one of those people who believes in the Armageddon to come or a World War III to come. We believe that as followers of the Ahlul Bayt, we can change the entire course of history only if we pray on these nights. You pray on these nights and you'll see the entire course of destiny changes. Have ma'arif of the Imam. But that final year will be strange. How will that final year be strange? If you look at all the traditions you find that a person comes. We've looked at Dajjal, right, in the last 2 nights. We've looked at that person who comes as your friend. He's coming to liberate you. He's coming to, and his tools we've looked at as well. You see, that Muslim who feels that he's secure in his deen, be very careful when the Dajjal comes. The tradition says, in the morning when he leaves this house, he'll have deen. When he comes back, he'll be a kafir. When he goes to sleep at night time, he'll have deen. When he wakes up in the morning, he'll be a kafir. It is as if the mascara on your eye, when it begins to run, in the same way, you find that your deen begins to run like this. Akhirul Zaman will be like that. It will be testing. Trial and tribulation will be upon you. When the Prophet of God, final time when Jibreel came, he asked him, he said, when is it that you're going to come again? He said, on 10 maqamats I'll come again. After you, the final one when I'll come, I'll take the iman of the people. The people will have no iman then. In this way, preserve your iman, because when the Dajjal comes, he comes with 2 mechanisms. One, as we discussed, shahwa, desires. He will appeal to your desires. He will appeal to all of your desires. Your life will be spent. Go to any newspaper today. Go to any magazine today. What you find today, even the advertisements we have, doesn't it appeal to your desires? Isn't there a man in his boxer shorts or a woman half naked? Or in any of these, you go and look. Don't we live in a celebrity culture today? Doesn't that celebrity culture teaches us from plastic surgery onwards? Now the debate isn't the fiqh debate on plastic surgery. The idea is that you're visualizing these, your senses are going crazy because of the fact that your shahwa is being, whether you're male or female, what you find today is that the shahwa is on overdrive. You dress in a particular way, you act in a particular way. When you go out, you do particular things. You can't leave the house without caking on makeup and putting on lipstick. And as a guy, the way that you go out, where your eyes are, where your mind is, all the surveys which have been done. Why? Because the system of the Dajjal makes you feel shahwa. It desensitizes you so that you go away from reality. And the second thing is the idea of music that Dajjal uses. Now the debate here isn't halal or haram music. You can look at your Maraja's fatwa on that. But the fact is that music will be used, and not all music is halal and not all music is haram. In this way you find that when haram music is used with shahwa, with your desires, you find that your entire body and your essence begins to burn. You move away, far away. In the tradition it says, right, when it comes to music. Let me give you this tradition. This tradition goes back to Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam. 14 years continuously he spent in jail. 14 years continuously. You know what type of a jail it was? Imagine yourself. Imagine yourself in a box where you're in the state of ruku and you can't move up. In a box. 14 years like this. Pain, suffering. Back pain, suffering. Imagine that. And all you get is a piece of bread and a bit of water. Your Imam suffered for 14 years like that. For one day, if I was to put you in a cell like that, you wouldn't be able to take it. For 14 years, he was weakened so much, weakened that almost he feels like collapsing. Imagine that for 14 years you're like that, right? After 14 years, the guards, there was a change of guards, rotation for 14 years. After 14 years, a guard comes and he says to him, he says, look, you know what, when I look at you in this state, my heart drops. Whatever you are, you're still the grandson of the Prophet, and all I can see is piety from you. You know what, why don't I take you out? The king's not going to know, the Khalifa's not going to know, Harun is not going to know, Ma'mun, all of these, they're not going to know. How about I take you out? It was the time of Harun Rashid. He says, Harun won't know. Let me take you out of the grave, well, take you out the cell. You come to my house. Why don't you stay in my house for? Nobody's going to know. He takes the Imam, he takes him to the house. The next day, the Imam turns around and says, put me back in the cell. He says, why? He says, why? He says, the reason being is that your next door neighbor plays music. There's a lot of music going on. The vain gatherings, women are dancing, there's music there. He says, but Mawla, it's not haram because you're being forced to listen to it. And according to Sharia, as you know, if you're being forced, you can't help it. But you know what he replies? He says, no, take me back to the cell. For me, that cell is better than sitting in a house where there's ma'asiyat, where there's sins going on next door. Now, when we look at traditions like that, today it really shakes you to see, why is the Imam going to such extremes? For you and me, he's emphasizing the fact that be very vigilant when it comes to haram and halal. We're not talking about halal music, right? We're talking about that music which is used for vain gatherings that all of the Maraji have said is haram. That nightclub music, that music that's in the bars, all of that type of music. Yes, we have halal, we have haram. This is not the place to discuss it though. You can go and read up about it. But the reality is this, that Imam is teaching us a lesson. Dajjal comes with two things. We looked at some of the mechanisms yesterday. It's now your responsibility to take care of yourselves, to take care of your souls, so that Dajjal doesn't misguide you, he doesn't take you away. There's another thing now the Imam is saying. You know what the Imam teaches us? He teaches us something from the Quran that you can recite, that when you recite this, you'll be protected from the Dajjal. How do we know? Where's the riwayat on this? You find one tradition, and a very firm tradition. When the Imam's head was cut off and was raised on a spear, as he went into Sham, he was reciting Surah Kahf. There's a verse within Surah Kahf, according to the ulama, if you were to recite that, you'd be prevented from the poison of Dajjal. It will save you from the... Imam was teaching us this, because that system, Imam was teaching us from that system. You see, all of this journey of Sayyid al-Shuhada is for us in Akhir al-Zaman to learn, to benefit, and to move forward. So we've looked at one component, which is Dajjal. Now look at the second component, Sufyani. You see, the idea of Sufyani is not found within any of the other tradition, but the Shia tradition. It isn't found within the books of Ahl Sunnah. Only some of them may believe in it, but not all of them. In the same way as you find a group of brothers from the Ahl Sunnah who believe that the Imam is alive, who believe that the Imam is in occultation, who believe in the 12 Imams. For example, the Sufi tariqats that we find today, you find most of them believe in the 12 Imams, and they believe that the 12th Imam is alive and is in Ghaibah and is the son of the 11th Imam alayhi salam. So you see, there is differences, But when it comes to Sufyani, even though you find a big group from Ibn Arabi to Ibn Athir, they believe in the 12 Imams, they believe that the Imam is alive, they believe in the Imam as well. The very famous Sunni Sufi of the 20th century, 21st century, when you look at the likes of Abdullah Dagestani, who's buried within Syria, or Sheikh Nazim, each one of them believes that the 12th Imam is alive, living in occultation, in the same way that we believe that the Imam is living. But there is one part that you don't find in the books of the Ahl Sunnah, and that is the rise of the Sufyani. That is only for us because the Imams have taught us this and we've known about this. What is the other reason? One of the reasons being is that he will raise the slogan of the Banu Umayyads. And today when you go to Syria, first time after the decline of the Banu Umayyads, you are finding slogans within Syria as they butcher people, as they chop their necks off, as they burn their bodies. They're raising a slogan, and that slogan is this, that we should go back to the glory of the Banu Umayyah. You're seeing this take place today. When you look at our tradition, it seems like everything is falling into place. But let me ask you something and let me tell you something. Do not become complacent. As we've seen within our traditions, the Zuhur of the Imam, according to certain scholars, would have come in the time of the Abbasids, right towards the end. But we weren't ready. Prepare yourself, because otherwise, if you do not prepare yourself, you will see another trial, massacre, tribulations come on this nation. How many more people are we going to give? How much more blood of ours is going to be shed? Today you think you're safe here? There is no safety in the world. When the problems come, know that if you do not stand up against oppression, when people oppress you, you will not find anybody to stand up against you. Stand up for you. You'll find this. Those people who rested in their houses, and we know so many of them, today they are worried now across the world. From Maghrib all the way down to Bahrain, from Bahrain all the way down to Pakistan, from Pakistan now even in India you're finding these problems take place. Even within Europe you're finding sectarian violence. Those terrorists who have gone to Syria from Europe and from America, what happens when they come back then? Because they have this sectarian mentality. When they come back to your countries, what are they going to do? The first place is going to be your place, which is not going to be safe. This isn't scaremongering, this is preparation. Believe me, inshallah, it doesn't happen. We can change the fates and destinies. But no, it says in our tradition, Islam will then only have two wings. You see, according to our tradition, this major group, which is known as Ahl Sunnah wal Jamaat, will cease to exist in the way that is existing. I've already given you examples. In Europe itself, from the UK, go to Pakistan today, go to India today, go to Afghanistan today, that major block, if you look at some of the great scholars of Ahl Sunnah, from Ghazali to Fakhr Razi, right? From Fakhr Razi to Suyuti, the iman and the belief and the faith system, the aqidah of all of these now doesn't exist anymore. The great Sunni scholars now, if you look at it, slowly it's diminishing. Slowly it's leaving. From 9/11 all the way today, if you look at the aqidah of Ahl Sunnah, it is becoming more Wahhabified, more fundamentalist, more terrorist in their approach. I'm not saying all Wahhabis are terrorists, but so far every terrorist that's been caught as a Wahhabi. That's a big statement. Every single terrorist that's been caught as a Wahhabi. Not saying all Wahhabis are terrorists, there's a difference. Not all Wahhabis are terrorists, but every single terrorist that's been caught as a Wahhabi. It's marginalizing now, it's shifting. When we go into meetings today, when we see the ideologies are shifting, many brothers from the Ahl Sunnah ask us for help. They say, our children are becoming fundamentalist. You guys help us. What is the solution? You help us. We'd rather that they socialize with Shia than become Wahhabis. But if you look at the tradition, you'll find two extremes. One will be Nasibi, Khawarij, and the other hand will be the followers of the Ahlul Bayt. And this major block today will separate. They'll either support the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, or they'll become the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt, which they'll become Nasibin and Khawarij. They'll go to that extreme. So today when we're facing this, today when we're worried about this, what is our responsibility then? We need to work together today. You see, our brothers are calling out for us. Even in the Sunni world, they're saying, come together, let's work together. Let's defeat this fundamentalism which is taking place. It's a Sunni issue, yes. We can say that, look, this isn't an issue that affects us. But believe me, the issue affects everyone because we live in a global society. Today, the Christians are willing to help us. The Jews are willing to help us. Why? Because they realize we live in a global society. If one person is affected, the entire nation is affected. This is why when it comes to fundamentalism, it becomes each one of our responsibilities to tackle it. Whether it's secular fundamentalism and the rise of the far right, or it's religious fundamentalism, it becomes our responsibility. How do we do that then? Let's go back to the nights that we're talking about, open our doors up, invite people in, do interfaith, have intrafaith, explain the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada, that message that teaches balance, that message that tells us that he was oppressed, but he stood up against oppression, regardless of skin, regardless of race, regardless of religion. When that Imam comes in, we have a duty to that Imam. Why? Because that Imam will establish a utopia. 2 nights ago I talked about the fact that every world religion looks at the Imam in some shape or form. The description of all of the characteristics of the Imam in all of the books. And if I had time, I'd go into it. I wanted to discuss it, I wasn't able to discuss it. Inshallah, maybe on the 11th night we'll discuss it, but tonight I'm going to take one part of it out from these 6 world religions, one part of it, and see the parallels. You see, we are waiting for that Imam to come. We are waiting. What is Mahdi? The one who is guided. He is also Hadi, the one who guides. He is what? The perfect man, right? What is the perfect man? The Prophet of God says, his name is my name. His title is my title. His characteristics are my characteristics when he talks about the Mahdi. The Mahdi is coming. Mahdi's appointed by God. Appointed by God. And he will come. All of the Muslims believe in this, right? So let me tell you, he's the perfect man. Who is the Mahdi? If you go into mysticism or the philosophy behind the Mahdi, you come to realize the Mahdi is the perfect man, meaning he's all of the names of Allah's Jalal and Jamal on one location. He is the entire universe. When the Imam walks, it's as if the universe is walking. Why? Because the Prophet is the perfect man. The final Prophet, our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. He is all of the universe, all of Alam Imkan, from the highest levels of Jabarut to the lowest levels of Nasut. All of the worlds are encompassed within the final Prophet. And the manifestation of the final Prophet is through the 12th Imam. So what is he? He is the names and attributes of God. If you go all the way back to the Vedas, and from the Vedas you look into the Taoists, to the Buddhists, to Judaism, to Christianity, to Islam, you find the Mahdi's characteristics have been described in all of that. But I'm going to just raise one religion and look at the parallels which we have. What is that religion? And it explains the concept of the Mahdi very well. It explains the concept of the Messiah, because each one of us are waiting for this Messiah to come. Which religion is it that we have the greatest parallel with? That religion is Judaism. Judaism has the same amount of depth when it comes to the final day and when it comes to the coming of the Messiah as Islam does. And I'm going to take the concepts of Judaism and I'm going to apply it to Islam. 3 things Judaism talks about when you go into the books. When you take all of the scattered traditions, Israeliyat, which are found within the Jewish books, 3 concepts come forward. And 3 of these concepts can be applied within Islam. It says, what is the system of Akhir Zaman? What is the coming of this Mahdi? What is this Mahdi? Who is this Messiah figure? It says one. One is this, that according to the Jewish nation, whenever the Jewish nation were in problems, they would wait for a Messiah figure to come to emancipate that nation, to remove that nation from difficulty. Musa was one of them. Yaqub was another one of them. David was another one of them. Solomon. Whenever this nation falls into problems, a prophet is raised. We say that Jesus was one of them as well, and we say the final prophet was one of them. A man who comes forward to alleviate the problems of the nations. So therefore today, when the universe and the globe and the people and the masses are suffering today, we are therefore awaiting a person to come forward and to emancipate this nation from the shackles of not just the nafs, not just the fact that you've been enslaved by the system. What is the system? The system is the system of your desires, essentially. Nobody can shackle you other than yourself. The biggest enemy that you have is yourself. The biggest idols are found within yourself. When we talk about the enemy, the enemy is not outside. The enemy is here. The enemy is within yourself. Tackle that enemy within yourself. Fight that enemy within yourself. This is why they say Akhir Zaman, and when you look at the Jewish traditions, that man who will come, he will emancipate the nation. We say the same thing, he will come to emancipate. The second tradition, when you look at all of the traditions found within Judaism, it comes to this, that the system of the Mahdi, and I use the Mahdi because we're Muslims, the system of the Mahdi is a system in and of itself. In the same way that we talk about the system of the Dajjal, there is a system which is known as the system of the Mahdi. What is this system when we talk about this? And we'll come to the person of the Mahdi, but the system of the Mahdi. The system of the Mahdi is this, that we as his followers work to balance the community in terms of 3 levels. The first is in terms of the environment, because the physical world has an effect upon us. Now look at the riwayat and see. Go to the traditions. It says when you look at greenery, your eyesight improves. Riwayat, Go to Hadith al-Mufaddal, right? When you look at it, the Imam is saying, sixth Imam, he's saying al-Mufaddal, no, look at greenery, your eyesight improves. Why? When you're depressed, you've been told to go to the seaside, go to greenery. Why? Because you become one with nature. Even the doctors, you've got doctors that tell you, you're depressed, go on a holiday, go down to the seaside, go down to the forest, go somewhere where there's green, take your mind off it, go back to nature. And you've got all of these alternative systems of meditation. They say it takes you to go. What did the Buddha do? Got up and he went into the forest. Why? You become one with it. Environment has a big effect on you. Building concrete buildings is not going to take you towards peace. The system, the environment. Second system, the society which you live in, right? You need your society to balance itself. How do we balance our society? The society and the self are interlinked. If you're at peace with yourself, your society is at peace as well. What do I mean by this? Balance your internal organs. Balance your internal faculties. You've seen people, right, when they're agitated, this agitation rubs off on you. If a person is depressed, if a person is agitated, when he comes to you, you can feel that agitation. You feel the imbalance within that person. Let me take you to a tradition to even simplify it. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says, he says, be very careful with the company that you keep. Be very careful with the company that you keep. Why? Because in 40 days you find the negativities and the positivities affect you. This is why you've been told, have good friends. The negativity rubs off on you. What do I mean by that? Let's say, for example, you're with a person who lies a lot. And it's possible you don't lie a lot, but there may be negativities within you, for example, that you backbite. That negativity comes up because of the fact that you're socializing with a person who's negative. You see, they say within ilmul kalam that there are two factors which are required for hidayah. If you want guidance, you need two things. One of them is the free will to want to change. We've discussed this, right? And the other one is what? Is the right atmosphere. If you don't have the right atmosphere, how many children have we seen corrupted? They go to university, right? They're good kids, but the social circle are going clubbing. 1 week comes, sorry, you know what is against my religion. 1 month, 2 months. But by the third month, okay, let's go to the club. We're not going to be drinking. We're not going to be dancing. We're just going to socialize. That's it. The minute they go in, everything goes into terminal decline then. Why? Because you've gone away. If you were to die in a club, you'd die. How would you die? In the state of what? Think about it. You've just done a sin. What are you? You're a fasik. If you go into, and let's say, God forbid, you were to take alcohol. Look at the riwayat on alcohol. Ummul khaba'is. Alcohol is the mother of all vices. They say a person who even takes a drop goes into your system. For 40 days, none of your worship is accepted. For 40 days, you are technically a kafir. If you die within those 40 days, you die the death of a kafir. You are characterized, you are seen as a kafir. 1 drop makes you a kafir. 1 drop for 40 days, it stays in your system. Now imagine if a problem befalls you, you need to pray. Where are you going to turn? You know that you've drunk. See, 40 days has an effect. 1 drop. That's the same. See, it's an intoxicant, right? The same thing if you were to puff on weed. You know, many people ask, what's the hukum on weed? It's an intoxicant. Whether you get into a state or not, it's an intoxicant. 1 puff of that, and you're a kafir for the next 40 days. You are technically spiritually najis. Think about it. 1 puff. That's all it takes. You want to puff? Next time you think about puffing, inshallah there's no one here that takes that puff. But the next time you think of marijuana, think of the fact, 40 days you're najis. 40 days, if you were to die in those 40 days, you die the death of a kafir. Do you want to take that risk? I wouldn't want to take that risk, believe me. All of my worship not accepted, my prayers, my fasting, all of these things not accepted, 40 days. Think about it. It doesn't mean you stop praying though. You still continue to pray because otherwise there's going to be 40 days of multiplied by 5 is a lot of praise to make up. At least if you're doing something wrong, at least do something right. See, never let go of your prayers. Even in the state of najasat, state of spiritual najasat, not the physical najasat. If you're in a physical najasat, you know what to do. Don't ever let go of your prayers. See, 40 days. So therefore, company is very important. Make sure you have the right company. Make sure you find the right spouse. Make sure you keep the right friends. Sometimes you think about it, you think, oh, this is too religious. Think about it. When the youth look to get married, and it's not a day to discuss this, but when you get to, and this is a very technical, important point, look at your future children, look at your future generations. Because you know what? Looks go. That fun-loving life goes. You know, when you're 18, when we were 18, we were different. 10 years later, you're different, right? The fun-loving nature goes. And by the way, I'm not that old. The fun-loving nature goes. In a sense that you're still fun-loving, but the passion, it changes over time. When you're 40 is different. When you're 50 is different. So look for something. You know, as it says in the tradition, if you look for looks, the looks are going to go. If you look for money, it's going to perish. What is it then? Look for a godly person, right? In the same way, when you make friends, look for a godly friend. You may think the person's a nerd, right? What makes the difference though? You know what I want? I want to improve myself. I want to become humble. Look for that person. Look for that person. You'll find those people. Company. Akhir zaman, therefore. If you want to prevent yourself from being destroyed, it is important for you to get the right equation. And the right equation means your friend circle, your knowledge. You see, even it says in the tradition, when you get your knowledge, make sure you get it from the right sources so that it doesn't corrupt you. Go towards an alim al-Rabbani once every 40 days, get counsel from that person. Sit and say, look, Sayyed Shaykh, just give me a nasiyah. Give me just one thing. Don't hound them. It says in the tradition, 6th Imam alayhi salam says to Anwan al-Basri, he says, look, if you want to be a true servant, and he talks about servitude, he says, don't hound the ulama. Don't ask for the sake of asking. Just ask what you need to, leave him and then go. Don't just sit there and that's it. The guy's trying to eat, the poor guy. You're asking him question upon question. He's trying to leave. You're asking him question upon question. It's not the way, the akhlaq of the Ahlul Bayt, akhlaq of the ask your needs in the right time and then go. There's a huge emphasis on adab. We need to teach ourselves that, nurture yourself that, understand what adab is. The idea of having that peace inside of yourself, having that akhlaq inside of yourself. People are not running away. You ask, take time out. That's what's important. See, the ulama, deal with them with akhlaq. In the same way, deal with your parents. And there's an entire thing of akhlaq that Islam talks about. Meet the alim al-Rabbani, revive your heart. Be prepared. I remember once I asked my cousin, he's a mujtahid in Qum, and I asked him, I said, look, when we talk about the dhuhur of the imam, give me a nasiyah. You know what he said to me? Those many years ago, he says to me, listen son, he says to me that build the dhuhur within yourself. Build it within yourself. Change yourself and you'll see the dhuhur of the imam alayhi salam. Build it inside of yourself. You see your heart, if it develops it, when you wake up in the morning and you say salam to your imam, you will hear the reply of your imam. Don't you want that? Don't you want to build that? Don't you want to be those people who are in direct contact with the imam? Let me take you to the story, right? 2 nights ago, I narrated the story, I didn't finish it. Ayatollah Khoui was leaving towards Najaf, and one of his friends was going to Tabriz as well. This friend now carries the story on. He says, Sayyid Khoui left, he says, we went to Tabriz. He says, when I went to Tabriz, there was a masjid there. Next to the masjid, there was a madrasa. He says, I enrolled at that madrasa. The purpose of my enrolling was to learn knowledge. He says that in the mornings when we used to get up, there used to be a man, and this man used to clean up. So he used to clean up after us. When we had breakfast, he would clean up afterwards. He says that if it was so cold, he would bring us hot water. He said he would be next to the toilets. If there was a problem, he would clean the toilets. So in this way, this man was basically a lower level of the mukhi, because he had all of those jobs that even the mukhi wouldn't like to do. So he says that he was cleaning all of these things up, he was doing all of these things, and people would take the mick out of him, right? They would abuse him, they would, oh, do this, do that. They wouldn't look at him as a human being. They would look at him as subhuman. You know, sometimes we do that, right? You find with our volunteers, sometimes we look at them subhuman. And sometimes you find that even our volunteers become arrogant, and they shout at people, and they scream at people. You see, it's a balance. You are doing a khidmah, you're doing a service. If you are a volunteer, what are you then? You are doing a service for the 12th Imam alayhi salam. Therefore, your akhlaq needs to be there. You see, it says in one of the traditions, right, especially when it comes to children, give a lot of time to children. Have a lot of patience towards children. It says, Akhir zaman, the elders will become so stern, and the Imam is warning against elders like this, that they will be abusive to children. They will push children away. And the youngsters will become so evil that they will stop saying salam to the elders. You see, this is one of the alamat of the coming of the Imam. So now look at it deeply. It says that this man was being abused. And sometimes we abuse people who are lower than us. You push him around. You abuse them. You push him away. You think that they're lower and inferior to you. But understand one thing, they are also a servant of God and doing the service to God. This man then says, he says it was a winter's day, and at night time I went to sleep. He says that my room was opposite this caretaker's room. And he said that it was cold, because in Tabriz it gets very cold. There was a thick quilt that he used to put over, because it gets into minus 15, 20. He says, at night time I felt like going to the toilet. He says, but I couldn't be bothered to get up. You know when it's really cold, you want to go to the toilet, but you can't get up? He was feeling like that. Half an hour went, he says, now I'm bursting, now what do I do? He says, but it's freezing cold. He's like, at the point where it's just about to come out, he says, right, let me run to the toilet. And there he's running to the toilet, holding, the container of water with one hand. In the olden days, it was like that. And as he runs to the toilet and he's just about to release himself, he sees that there's a light coming from this muki's room. He looks up and he's thinking, why is the light coming? And there was no windows to the muki's room, by the way. There was only a door. And the light is open, and the door is slightly open, and the muki's conversing. So this guy, being nosy as he was, he jumped into the toilet, but he kept the door open. So just in case the guy comes out, I want to see who it is. So there he releases himself, he does everything, comes out. And as he comes out, he opens the muki's door. As he opens, the light closes, the muki's sitting there. Muki says, don't just run into my room like that. He says, you know what? Where's that guy gone? He says, well, what guy? He says, the guy that you were talking to. He says, you can have a look, there's no guy in my room. He looks up, down, everywhere. He says, look, tell me, what's the secret? He says, where's the guy? He says, there is no guy in this room. He says, I was listening that you were speaking to someone. He insists. He says, look, for the sake of this, for the sake of that, just tell me. The guy goes, okay, I'll tell you on one condition, that you don't tell anyone. He says, yes. Who was that person you were conversing with? He's saying that light that you saw and that person I was conversing to was the master of the times, Hujjat ibn al-Hasan. The guy breaks down, he hits the floor. He says, all of this time people have been abusing you, I didn't even realize who you were. The guy says, look, don't worry about it, just take a lesson from it. You don't know who you're abusing, which wali Allah could turn out to be. You know what he says then? He says, who are you? He says, we are the secret helpers of the Imam. You know what the guy says? He says, afterwards, whenever I saw someone abusing him, because my heart felt so, I wanted to do something. But he says, I couldn't do anything. He says, one day comes, this man at night time goes towards doing wudu, and after that he disappears, never to be seen again. Why did he disappear for? Because he realized that people were catching on, and this person's patience wasn't allowing that he continues his job. Know one thing then, even within the 21st century, look around you and see, there are waliullahs everywhere. You see, I remember a story that comes to mind now. Ayatollah Najafi Marashi, very famous marja in the 80s, right? Ayatollah Marashi, all of you have heard of him. The one who's, when he writes as well, is very famous. That he says to his son, bury me with the turba of Sayyid al-Shuhada and take the tissue that I used to use to wipe my eyes, put it in my grave. You've seen his will, inshallah, you could read it online, it's all there. Ayatollah Marashi says, one day he sits there and he prays to Allah and he says, Allah, introduce me to one of your walis, your friends. Now when we think about a friend of Allah, we think about a guy with a big beard and a big turban. Ayatollah Marashi says at Maghrib time, he does wudu when he goes to sleep. That marja who died in 91, if I'm not mistaken, as he goes to sleep, he sees his masjid Kufa and he sees Amir al-Mu'mineen standing. Now Ayatollah Marashi was in Qom, right? So obviously if he wants to meet a wali in the locality, it's going to be in Iran. And more than anything, that wali will be an Iranian because of the locality. If he was in Iraq, it would have been Iraqi. And otherwise, they say Allah's world, this ard of Allah, is not free at any time from his friend. It is more than possible within Toronto, there is a man who is a waliullah. You wouldn't know him, but he's most probably here. He comes into your community, you don't realize it, you don't recognize him. Ayatollah Marashi says, I go to sleep, I do my wudu, I want to see a waliullah. He says that I see Masjid Kufa, Amir al-Mu'mineen is sitting there, and as Amir al-Mu'mineen sits there, he says to the people, where are my poets? Come and recite poetry. He says one by one people come and recite poetry until it gets to a stage where he says, where is my Shahriyar? Says a man comes forward and he recites some qasida, and when he finishes qasida, If you look back, Ayatollah Marashi says, he says, I looked at this person up and down. He was a normal person, but I realized that that is this waliullah I'm looking for. This Shahriyar was an actual person. Sayyid Muhammad Hussain Bahjat, otherwise known as Shahriyar, he died in 88 or 89, in the 80s. So this, and his poetry is online, by the way, you can go and you can listen to it online. It says that Ayatollah Marashi opens his eyes and he gets up, he says, who's this Shahriyar guy? He says to his khadim, find him. Eventually they find him in the day and they realize he's in Tabriz. They say, call him down. The next day he comes down. 2 days have gone right from that dream. As he comes down and he comes towards the house of Ayatollah Marashi, he walks towards the house. He knocks on the door. The khadim comes out. He says, who are you? What do you want? He says, Agha has called me. I'm Shahriyar. He says, fine, come inside. As he walks in, Ayatollah Marashi looks at Shahriyar. The very first thing is, Shahriyar, recite for me that qasida. He says, which qasida are you talking about? That qasida when you were reciting, Aliyay Humaya Rahmat Tuche Ayati Khudara. It's a very famous qasida in Farsi. He says, recite for me that. Shahriyar looks up. He says, Ayatollah, tell me, how do you know about that qasida? He says, why? He says, because 2 days ago, I was writing this qasida. I sat down, did wudu, I did tawassul to Amir al-Mu'mineen, and I began to write. You know what Ayatollah Marashi says? He said, at the very same time, I did wudu, and I saw an alam roya that you were standing there and you were reciting for Amir al-Mu'mineen. He turns around and he says, I believe you. The reason why I believe you is that I've told no one. But you know what, Ayatollah? As I was writing it, it was as if from the top, it was coming down. It was as if Amir al-Mu'mineen from Kufa and Najaf was inspiring me, and as he inspired me, I began to write. He turned around, Ayatollah Marashi he says, know that you are wali of Allah, because you are that person that Amir al-Mu'mineen pointed towards. So you see, there are people living in this day who can be normal people, but know that they can be friends of Allah. You can be a person like that. He says that the whole of the Imam comes, build yourself up, change yourself. It's like in the tradition it says, right? If you go back and see Sheikh Abbas Qummi writes in a tradition, he takes his tradition back to the Imams. He says that a person who writes one qasida, he says a person who recites one piece of poetry, for the sake of Sayyid al-Shuhada, if it makes people cry, 40 people, Jannah becomes wajib upon him. He says, no, actually, you know what? 30 people. He says, no. He says, 10 people. He says, no. He says, if one person has one tear and that tear comes out, what is it? The person who cries, Jannah. The person who recites Jannah. What is the criteria though? Arif and bihaqqih. Understand the ma'rif of that Imam, understand, and Jannah becomes incumbent upon you. It's not just for everyone, you see. 2 types of people cried. On the day of Karbala, you find the day of Ashura on the land of Karbala, 2 types. One was the army of Yazid. The other one was the army of Hussein. What was the difference between Yazid and Hussein? Yazid's army didn't do anything. Hussein's army stood up and said, Labbaika ya Hussein. Each one of you needs to stand up tonight, in your hearts, in your minds, with your tongues, with your arms, with your feet, and say, Labbaika ya Hussein. Remember Imam Hussein. Say that so that Imam Hussein can say, and he can say Labbaik to you as well. You see, Imam Hussein is saying Labbaik to you. Are you not going to say Labbaik to Imam Hussein? Build that within yourself. How do we build that? With your tongue, with your heart, with your soul. Every inch of blood that you have, every ounce of blood you have, make sure that that blood is for Sayyid al-Shuhada. Get to that stage where you can say that even if they were to chop off our necks, we would still go to a Sayyid al-Shuhada. And I remember that very famous qasida that was spoken, and I remember 2006, Sayyid Jawaz Zakir passed away. Before he passed away, he would recite in the Haram. He said in the Haram once, listening, he said that one of my friends died. That friend of mine would say, Sayyid al-Shuhada, even if you were to leave me, I wouldn't leave you and turn my back to you. And even if you were to take off my head, I would still follow you. He says that when this person died, he says that he met Sayyid al-Shuhada, and he comes back to the Sayyid and he says to the Sayyid, he says, look, Sayyid al-Shuhada is saying, don't say that if you leave me. Say, even if you leave me, Hussein, I will still be waiting for you. That is Sayyid al-Shuhada. He's waiting for all of you tonight. Are you going to turn back? Are you going to repent? Are you going to go back towards Sayyid al-Shuhada? Imam Hussein is standing in the plains of Karbala today. If you don't see it, close your eyes. You'll see it in your heart. Imam is standing there and he is saying, Hal min nasin yansuruna. Is the... Tonight Imam Hussein's calling you. Who's going to answer that? I know all of you will answer it. I know each one of you, your tears will answer it. When those tears come, the tears will answer it. So you see the 12th Imam? We are building towards that time when the Imam then comes. Finally, Sufyani. I want to finish him today, and inshallah. In the tradition it says this: Sufyani's reign will be 6 to 9 months. Why 6 or why 9 months? In the riwayat it says 6 months if Imam comes on Laylatul Qadr. One riwayat says Laylatul Qadr. And 9 months because on the day of Ashura the Imam comes. We're waiting tomorrow for the coming of that Imam. How do we wait for him? Wait for him as a person who's broken. Today we're going to cry. The best weapon that you have is your tears. You know what that Imam comes and does? We'll discuss it in a minute. But when Sufyani comes, the Prophet of God is saying, even if you're underground, right? Even if you're hiding, Sufyani will come and take you out of the ground. Bloodshed, there will be blood in the streets of Damascus. Blood will be flowing. That's how deadly the rise of the Sufyani will come. Until that moment, the dhuhur of the Imam then comes. What is the Imam's? Where are the Imam's headquarters? In Kufa. Which masjid? Masjid al-Sahla. Where does he sleep at night time? He goes back to his jad in Karbala. Imams stand when it begins. There will be no one in this world that stops it. Because when that Imam marches, they say one of his followers will be like 100. The power of that follower, the iman of that follower will be like a mountain. Each one of you will be like Malik al-Ashtar. When you begin to walk, and when the Imam comes, you will see people will come towards the Imam. You see people in thousands, because the Imam is a timeless figure. When the Jews look at the Imam, they will say, that's our Messiah. And when the Christians look at the Imam and they see Jesus, they say, that's where we should be. And when the Muslims look, say, that's where we shall be. Become that nation, because know one thing. If you're not ready, Allah will change nations. He will raise another nation who will help the Mahdi. So become that nation. He can change that. You've seen in history. A chosen race were waiting for the final prophet to come. When he came and they rejected him, what happened? Allah took a lowly nation, the Arabs of the Hijaz, and he raised them up to greatness. This is why when you look at the khutbah of Fatima alayhi salam, she says, what did you have? You had nothing there. You had no respect. My father gave you respect. You see, the Prophet of God raised that nation in the same way when the Imam comes, he'll raise that nation. In the tradition it says, the first people from the Muslims who will go and support the Imam will be the people of Yemen. Amazing tradition for people of Yemen. We don't have time to discuss how and why, but know one thing. If we did tabligh in Yemen, I've met people from Yemen and the love they have for the Ahlul Bayt. If we were to invest just a little bit of time and effort within Yemen, you'll find all of Yemen become followers of the Ahlul Bayt. Because if you look at the courtesy and the love that they have for the Ahlul Bayt is not parallel. There's no second to it. So therefore we need to, you see, all of these things are open. We need to educate ourselves. Look at the riwayat, look at the traditions. There will be a time that will come when Jews, Muslims and Christians will stand side by side. In fact, no, when the Hindu, the 10th incarnation, when Kali Yoga finishes, according to the Hindu traditions, when that Kali Yoga is destroyed and the 10th one comes, the incarnation of Vishnu, what does that mean? Basically the tajalli, the manifestation of the divine. Who is it? The one who's guided. Who's the one who's guided? We in Arabic call him the Mahdi. When he comes, then you find Hindus, Taoists, but everyone will be surrounded around Imam Mahdi. What will Imam Mahdi do then? In the tradition it says the very first thing he will do is he will move to Mecca towards Medina. And as he comes towards Medina, he will go to the broken grave of his mother. You know which mother? That mother, in the tradition it says, Usul al-Kafi, you could go look at it, you could look at, in the tradition, Bihar it's mentioned, it says that when Zahra was coming back from the court, after her haqq was taken from her, as she was coming back, in the tradition it says that her feet were swollen, right? They say one woman was holding one arm, the other woman was holding the other arm, because she'd stood up for so long that she was feeling weak. Somebody asked them, one of the Sunni scholars asked, they said, why was it that Zahra's Abba was so long that it was dragging on the floor? You know the tradition says, it wasn't the fact that her Abba was so long, it was the fact that her feet were dragging and she couldn't stand up properly. And as they dragged her towards the streets and they were bringing her towards the house, it says a man came behind. He was a tall man, the tradition tells you who he is. He grabs her by the shoulder and he pulls her by the shoulder. And as he pulls her by the shoulder, he slaps her on the face. As he slaps her on the face, you know who she calls? She doesn't call Amir al-Mu'mineen. She She doesn't call Imam Hassan Hussein. She goes, Mahdi, come and help me, Mahdi, come and take revenge. This very Mahdi now this Mahdi goes into Medina. And as he goes into Medina, what does he do? He goes to the broken grave of Fatima. And as he goes to the broken grave, at that moment, he tells the world that this is the grave of my grandmother Fatima Zahra. He says, this is that location. This is that maqam. He says that this is the broken grave of Fatima Zahra. Tonight is a night of tears. Tonight is a night of journey. Each one of you have come here to cry. Go with Zahra today from Medina to Karbala. Let's all go to Karbala today, because Hussein is alone today. Sayyid al-Shuhada has no one today. What happened? All of the people of Kufa have deserted him. Sayyid al-Shuhada is alone. Let's go to Karbala today. Let's see what's going on the heart of the Imam. Let's see what's going on the heart of the 12th Imam. You know, in a tradition it says that Sayyid al-Shuhada screamed, right, at certain maqamats. One of them was at the maqam of Ali Asghar. Sayyid al-Shuhada remembered you Shia. Now that tradition I was telling you, Sayyid al-Shuhada remembered you on 2 maqamats. You know what one of them was? One of them was at the final time, when he comes for the final time towards Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. When he comes to Imam Zain al-Abidin, at that moment he lifts his hands up and he looks towards you Shia. He says, Shiati. He says, oh my Shia, whenever you have cold water, whenever you drink water, know that I was killed thirsty. He says, whenever you look at a madloom person, he says, cry over that madloom. But also remember, I was killed madloom as well. I'm the grandson of the Prophet and I was killed madloom. Second time when Imam says this is when he comes towards Sakina. As he comes towards Sakina, he says, Shiati. He says, my Shia, know one thing. If only you were here to see me, how I took my small baby to take him towards the Maqtal, to take him and give him water. He says, if you were to see me with my hands spread like that, to see me take water, what would he have done? You would have supported me. Know at that maqam. He says, 2 places say the Shuhada cries. Now ask for your prayers. Those people who don't have children, may Allah give them children for the sake of Ali Asghar. For those people who are suffering, may Allah remove that suffering for you. Sayyid al-Shuhada is alone. In the riwayat it says he is walking from tent to tent and he comes to a particular tent. You know what he hears? He hears a woman sitting in that tent and she's holding her baby and she says to the baby, says it's going to be a fierce battle tomorrow. He says, I wish you were older, Ali Asghar. If you were older, I would have said, why don't you go and sacrifice your life as well for the sake of your father. She looks at the baby, tears come into her eyes. You know what she says? She says, but I don't know what I'm going to say on the day of judgment when I meet your grandmother Fatima Zahra. Everyone sacrificed their children and you're going to be alive there. You know what happens? You know the most moving and the most heartfelt part for Sayyid al-Shuhada is this mother and the broken heart of this mother. They say Sayyid al-Shuhada doesn't recite 2 units of praise at any stage. He recites it at the stage when Ali Asghar is killed. At that location he recites it because it's heavy-hearted. I remember in Qum many years ago, right? I remember in Qum, there was a student in Qum. In the student, he says that I took my baby, right? He took the baby was ill. He took it from the mother, he takes it to the hospital. Now we saw this with our own eyes. You know what happened in the hospital? The baby passes away. We saw him come out of the hospital. He didn't know what to do. He used to walk from the roadside, he would go to the door of his house and he would walk again and he would go again. So we asked him, he says, why don't you go in your house? He says, when the mother gave me the baby was Salim. Now that I'm coming back, the baby has died. He says, I don't know what to do, what to say to the mother. How do I go inside? It says, now it starts. This is the journey. This is the massacre for Sayyid al-Shuhada. And I'm going to go slowly so that you can cry tonight. It says that Sayyid al-Shuhada here, he says that night comes, one by one, he speaks to the companions. And as he speaks to the companions, he looks at Qasim. Qasim says, is my name written? You know what Sayyid al-Shuhada replies? He says, even Ali Asghar's name is written. And at that moment, Qasim says, are they going to come towards the tents? Imam Hussein doesn't tell him that after we die, they're going to attack the tents. Imam Hussein at this location says, he says, no, I'm going to take the baby out. One by one, Ashura Day comes, one by one, each one of those go. Each one of them gives their lives. One by one, you see, Akbar goes, Qasim goes, Abbas goes, One by one, all the Ashab Hussein have gone. You know what the tradition says? The tradition says that moment comes when Sayyid al-Shuhada is alone and there is no one there. Look at the riwayat and see. He says an older man, broken, his back is broken, his eyesight is gone, he can't see, he can't hear anything. What does he do? He's standing there alone at that. The grandson of the Prophet, the riwayat says, a person whose heart is heavy, his heart is breaking. What does he do? He looks to the right, he looks to the left, he sees all of the bodies and he says, Hal min nasin yansuruna. Is there anyone to help us? Is there anyone to help the haram of the Prophet? You know what it says in tradition? It says Imam Zain al-Abidin is fainted. He says he gets up and you know what he does? He says, Aunt, bring my walking stick and bring my sword. She says, why bring your walking stick? He says, because I can't stand up. He says, why sword? He says, because our father is calling and he's saying, is there anyone to help us? They say Imam Zain al-Abidin falls again on the floor. The women begin to cry this time. And as the women begin to cry, Imam turns around and he says, why are the women crying for? I'm still alive. Zainab, why do you cry when I'm still alive? Don't you know what happens to my heart when you cry? You know, at that moment they all cry. They say that small baby has chucked himself on the floor. He's waiting for you to come. You know what it says in the riwayat? It says Sayyid al-Shuhada goes, and as he goes into the tent, he looks towards Rabab. Rabab takes this child. Rabab dresses the child in white and Rabab gives it. But you know when she gives it, you know what she says? She says, this is the first time you are going out alone with your father. And she whispers something. Nobody knows what she whispers, but my heart tells me she's whispering there to Al-Yasir, and she's saying, son, if your father is attacked, go and give your neck for the sake of your father. If that arrow misses, you give your neck so that that arrow hits your neck, but it doesn't hit the Imam of the time. In the tradition it says now, Sayyid al-Shuhada takes his baby, and in the tradition it says he puts him within his abba, shields him within his abba. Mukhtar asked the army of Yazid afterwards. It says, oh people, oh army of Yazid, was there a time when you cried as well? He said, yes, there was a time where we all cried. He said, when was the time when you all cried? He said, when Hussein brought a 6-month-old baby into the Maqtal, he says, that's when we cried. He says, what happened at that location? He says, Hussein was carrying something. We thought he was carrying a Quran. Hussein was broken, and as he was walking, he was stumbling as he walked. And as Hussein came forward, he was carrying something. We thought it was the Quran. When Hussein opened it up, there was a child there. And as there was a child there, Hussein said, this child is thirsty. The milk of its mother is dried. He hasn't drunk for a couple of days. Why don't you feed him? And if you think that I'm going to drink it, I'll put him on the ground. For all of those mothers who have babies, imagine your baby now. Your child, 3 days hasn't drunk anything. You know what the tradition says? It says he was like a fish. He would open his mouth when the fish is taken out of water. He would breathe and he would close his mouth again. And again he would open his mouth and he would close his mouth again. And again he would try and breathe. And again he would open his mouth. And again he would close his mouth. They say what happens? They say Imam Hussein looks towards Askar. He says, Askar, it's time for your jihad now. You do your jihad. We were waiting for you, Askar. And the tradition says, Askar takes out his dry tongue like this, and he rubs his tongue over his lips. And as he rubs his tongue over his lips, everyone begins to cry there in the Maqtal. And as they cry, Umar ibn Sa'd sees everybody is crying. He comes to Hurmala. He says, Hurmala, cut this kalam of Hussein. Cut this, kill him, kill this child. You know what Mukhtar says? Mukhtar says to Hurmala, he says, how did you kill him? I heard you dropped your arrow. You know what Hurmala says? He says, as I lifted my arrow for one time, he says, I lifted it. I saw from this corner of my eye, he said, I saw feet coming to the side of the tent. I saw a mother standing there. I dropped my arrow. He says, second time when I lifted it, I dropped my arrow. He says, but when the third time, I hear a woman in black, and she says to me, she says, Hurmala, why are you killing the son of my son for? Hurmala, don't you have any children? In the riwayat it says, he takes a 3-pronged arrow, and as he takes it, he begins to fire it, and as he begins to fire it, Askar raises his neck. In the Maqtal it says, it hits him in one ear, from ear to ear it goes, and his head decapitates, and as his head begins to decapitate, blood comes onto Imam Hussein's hand, and as his blood comes, he looks to the sky, he looks to the ground, he rubs it on his face. As he rubs on his face, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He takes this dead body, he takes it towards the Maqtal. He says, Rabab, come and help me. Your son has been decapitated. In the Maqtal it says, he looks towards Rabab. He says, I don't want them to desecrate this body of my son. Let's go and bury him. Hussein goes behind. He begins to dig a grave. He buries Asgharin. He closes the grave. He looks towards Rabab and he says, I've heard from the Prophet of God, it is mustahab that there should be some water there. Rabab starts to cry. Water falls in. But what happens? The 11th day comes. 4 horsemen come out. Umar ibn Sa'd says there's one more body that hasn't come. Rabab is standing there in the Maqtal. 4 horsemen come with spears. They begin to hit the spear on the ground. And as they hit the spear, Rabab is watching and she's praying and they begin to hit it. They go back. Eventually it comes to a stage. One man gets his spear, hits it in the ground. And as he hits it into the ground, a small baby's body comes up. And as that baby's body comes up, you can see the head is broken on the head. He takes a knife and he cuts the remaining head. He raises it on his spear. Rabab looks towards the Maqtal. She looks towards Sayyid al-Shuhada. Matam Hussein.